I'd now like to hand over to Andrew Hayes. He's managing partner at Hudson Sandler, and that for our next activity, which is a discussion about ESG and the retail sector. Many of you will know Andrew. For those who don't, he's one of the most experienced financial and corporate PR advisors in Europe, and he's heavily involved in the firm's Russian practice. Andrew, if you're there, thank you very much. And we're all very much looking forward to hearing the panel.
Spasiba, Alf, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And thank you very much for inviting Hudson Sandler to sponsor today's forum, which is a great honor for us, given all the brilliant work you and your team are doing, Alf, in challenging times to build trade and investment flows between our countries. So we're very, very pleased to have the opportunity to support it today. By way of background, Hudson Sandler is a leading strategic communications and sustainability consultancy working in Russia, where we've been active for 12 years, supporting many fantastic clients across virtually every sector of the economy, from our offices here in London, as well as our offices in Moscow and Hong Kong. Now, today's panel discussion is focused on how the Russian consumer is putting or not putting sustainability at the heart of its relationships with brands as we enter, hopefully, a post-pandemic world over 2021. Conventional wisdom is, as we've just heard, is that Russian consumers are behind those in the West when it comes to paying up to tackle climate change and social dislocation. But that easy assumption belies many of the realities we're about to discuss. To discuss them, I'm delighted to have 5 expert panelists here today. Firstly, Rebecca Gudgeon, who is a colleague of mine at Hudson Sandler and our partner heading up our HS Sustain franchise, focused on environmental, social and governance for clients who want a differentiated approach to cut through all the noise around ESG. Secondly, Michael O'Brien, who is the Senior Corporate Governance Specialist at BNY Mellon, giving him a unique insight into why 85% of investors are willing to pay a 10% premium to acquire stocks with a positive ESG record over ones with a negative profile, according to McKinsey. Thirdly, Maxime Contin is Chief Storyteller at Dodo Brands, a really fascinating international group developing a portfolio of digital-first QSR brands, perhaps best known for its pizza business, which is now the market leader in Russia by some way and operating in 13 countries. Fourthly, David Henderson Stewart, who is managing director at the Rakita Watch Factory, where iconic watches are engineered that were used by Soviet cosmonauts and polar explorers, now focused on providing precision watches for the discerning buyer. And finally, but by no means least, Irina Anshushina, who is Director for Sustainable Business and Corporate Affairs for Unilever in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. So good afternoon, panelists. Delighted to have you here today.
Andrew, sorry, can I just interrupt? We can't see you. Are you sat away from the video camera?
No.
Okay, well, you're if you can get closer, that might help.
I can't get any closer, I'll be kissing it, Alf.
Okay, sorry then, okay. We can hear you perfectly though, so sorry.
I don't know what's wrong there. And let me have another go. Is that, can you see me now?
No, you're sort of floating, you're half in, half out of the screen, which when it happens to me, it's because of the distance from the video camera.
Is that better?
Yeah, no, I know the room that Andrew's in. Andrew, if you move towards the video camera and TV screen on the wall, we will be able to see you.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Sorry about this, everybody.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, almost.
Is that better? Is that better?
A bit, but not quite.
Tell you what, Alf, why don't we carry on? And I'm not particularly attractive.
Yeah, okay, carry on. Yeah, I think that's good. Sorry for interrupting. Thanks.
Thanks for that, but I think we'll carry on. I'm sorry you can't see me, but I don't think you're missing much, I promise you. Now, as to questions for those joining from the forum, please submit them through the chat icon, and I'll pick out as many as time allows during the conversation. And also, given time constraints and the breadth of the subject we're discussing, I've asked panelists to keep their answers relatively brief and sharp if you can. Panelists, thank you very much. So, first question, let me start up with a general question about whether the pandemic has accelerated or held up the focus of Russia's consumers on healthy choices and sustainability more generally in your various sectors. Can I ask you first, Irina?
So hello everyone, I hope I'm not floating and everybody can see me pretty well. So yeah, actually I represent a company which operates in the FMCG market, and you know, to be honest, we're one of the few lucky ones who weren't really affected highly by the pandemic, because you know, we produce soap and soup, as we say, and most of the products are basically of essential consumer needs. But in general, I would say that definitely we have seen some emerging trends, especially when the pandemic struck. So obviously we have seen a rising interest towards cleansing agents like Domestos, for example. It was super popular at that point of time, even despite the fact that some consumer view it as a high price solution for home care. We have seen a significant surge in the consumption of soap, and both liquid and regular soap was popular regardless of the region. So it was one of the, you know, highest in demand products that Unilever produced at that point of time. Interestingly, we have seen an increased consumption of tea, because you know, people moved to their homes from the offices, and you know, obviously coffee is usually consumed as something, as a solution for you to, you know, start to kick off the day in the office in the morning. And we saw that tea has become a much more preferred solution for most of the consumers who worked from home. We have seen a slight change in the consumption of hairstyle products, obviously, because you know, people would mostly use them to go to work, from work, for any other out of home occasion. That was not the case anymore. Interestingly, we don't see this trends much for the next year. So we have recently been looking into the analytics provided by our partnering agencies, and we see that some of the trends were mostly temporary, basically. And I don't know if this is connected mostly with the optimism of our consumers, believing that next year we somehow magically will switch back to office modes. But you know, we'll see. Obviously, this affected some of our some of our decisions in terms of how we appeared at points of sales. So we try to not to actually push the products in demand, but to try and inform our consumers in the most appropriate way, that they can not only buy just the products of our brand, but products of other brands as well. This is what, for example, our global brand Lifebuoy soap brand has been doing. So when they communicated to consumers, they actually said that you can use a Lifebuoy soap or any other brand of soap that you would like to use, even a competitor one. So yeah, we have seen this, you know, as an FMCG company, we have seen some shifts, but generally was really encouraging is that we still continue to operate for the needs of the consumers. And what's important, that all of our factories stayed operational, because we saw that our products were still in need for most of the population.
Thank you very much, Irina. Interesting. Tea sales have gone up in Russia at home, and alcohol sales have gone down. I think we've seen the reverse dynamic here in the UK. Maxime, can I ask you next, please? Dodo's experience of how the pandemic's impacted trading, particularly around healthy eating agendas, if at all.
Oh yeah, thanks. Well, I have to say that in my view, the sustainability question is quite tricky in the food service industry in general, all over the world, but it was especially tricky here in Russia during the pandemic. To begin with, I think that we don't see that huge demand for the sustainability policies, neither from our customers, nor from the government. I would say that it wasn't top on the priority list for both of these groups. And it was before the pandemic, and the pandemic made it even worse in three ways. Firstly, it's obvious that the food service industry was hit the hardest in this pandemic, or among the hardest hit on industries everywhere in Russia as well. And secondly, we see that the demand is growing in delivery, and delivery is unfortunately a sector which is infamous for its huge waste, because everything that is delivered has to be packed, and while doing deliveries, we are doing a lot of we are producing a lot of waste, and also every delivery is delivered usually by car, and it's another contribution to the carbon emissions. And the third factor is probably that we, of course, as a society, as a population, we want to stop the virus and to make it spread as slowly as possible. And hygiene plays a great role here, and it increases our impact on the environment as well, because right now, for example, the government introduced new regulations. Under these regulations, we have to wear gloves in the kitchen when we are cooking. It's questionable. It can be debatable whether it's a proper solution in terms of hygiene and the fight against the virus. Because for example, in our experience, and I think that a lot of people from the restaurant industry would agree with me, in our experience, it's much safer and easier to control hygiene standards when you cook with your bare hands and wash them regularly than with gloves. But the regulations are here, and we are, of course, we follow them. But these produce lots of used gloves, totally non-recyclable, obviously, and we as an industry are producing lots of so our footprint is becoming even more unsustainable than it was before the pandemic. So we have, to sum it up, we have operators who are fighting for their survival, and of course, when you are fighting for the survival, you aren't thinking about like long-term effects of your business or of your actions. We have growing delivery, which is worse than dine-in in many aspects, or can be worse than dine-in. And I'm not talking about our company, but across the sector. And thirdly, we see government and hygiene standards that producing lots of waste. And so, in terms of your question about healthy habits, we don't actually see anything like that. People are happy to have a meal delivered to them, because sometimes their options for dining in are limited, and so they are happy to eat whatever they like, and maybe even more. They are willing to more indulge in unhealthy eating than before the crisis, obviously, because of the pressure everyone is feeling. That's about it.
Who can resist a delicious dodo pizza? Who can resist it?
Oh yeah, nobody.
And David, in the world of watches, and watches, of course, do not have chips or batteries, and perhaps take a slightly longer term view, do you think the pandemic is going to have any impact on how your brand is regarded and to your advantage in the longer term, or is it can be exaggerated?
Well, I personally didn't notice in any way that the pandemic has increased the focus of Russians towards sustainability, at least in my sector. What I did know, I mean, the focus towards sustainability basically is changing your behaviors in a way that makes it more difficult, doing things that you wouldn't do otherwise. I was very surprised how much Russians are disciplined in terms of social distancing and wearing masks and gloves and all of that. So to some extent, I think I was surprised, and I think it shows that Russians can change their behavior. That's all I can say in terms of in our sector, because in terms of sustainability.
Thank you. And Rebecca, wouldn't that reflect what we're seeing here in the UK as well as Russia? It hasn't really, it's probably pushed it slightly down the agenda. I don't know, would you agree with that?
I think it very much depends on the company. Certainly with some of the big industrial companies where we do a lot of work with Russian big industrial companies, we've seen corporates sacrifice things like certain board committees and other investment opportunities before they sacrificed their sustainability commitments over the last year. And actually, this year, Magnet launched an absolutely amazing sustainability strategy. We know Lenta's along the same roads as well. And I think there are two reasons why what we've observed in terms of our Russian clients, why that's happened. And that's about sustainability covering much more. Sustainability is a catch-all term, and it can be anything. It can be environmental, it can be social, it can be governance, it can be the whole piece. And I think the focus is very much, because of the pandemic, has very much been on the social piece of that, and actually just responding to that has kind of driven quite a lot of the sustainability strategies, or the delivery of sustainability strategies over the last year. And then I think also there are a lot of companies we work with who are very aware that they might be listed on Western stock exchanges or have investors with a Western mindset. And they're all looking to the economy post-pandemic, so they all want to make sure that they emerge from this period in a good, strong place to be able to have the ESG profile that they want from day one post-pandemic.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm picking that up on that, Michael. In your experience, what kind of valuation premium can Russian corporates realistically expect from international investors if they rate highly on ESG metrics?
Thank you, Andrew. It's difficult to say, quite honestly. We haven't really seen a whole lot of research focused on Russia specifically with regards to premium valuations caused by ESG, but there certainly has been a lot of research internationally looking more broadly. As a matter of fact, MSCI had conducted a survey on this, or did a research paper that just came out last year with regards to the premium valuations that can be expected. They looked at a basket of stocks from 2007 to 2017, about 1,600 stocks that looked at if they have higher ESG ratings and what kind of impact it has on valuations. What they really found was that typically if you see higher ESG ratings, you will see higher valuations. There's typically a lag period of about 3 years though. So what they're generally seeing is that if you have ratings increases, that it's really ratings increase momentum that's causing the higher valuations, not the higher valuations themselves. And I think it's important to really put that in context to a certain degree. It's not the ESG ratings and having the higher ESG ratings that causes the higher valuation. It's the things that went into you getting that higher ESG rating. So, it's not like there's a whole lot of international investors out there that are investing based on ESG ratings. They're looking at the things that have caused it. So, that you need to be, very careful about not assigning causation when there's correlation. So typically we see the ratings, typically see we increases in valuation. I think one of the common things that we see amongst our issuer clients, they'll talk about, hey, we've made these initiatives, we've put resources into this. We really haven't seen anything that's come to fruition as far as the valuation is concerned. I think you need to kind of, put it in context of, first of all, Rome wasn't built in a day. As I say, what we see as far as the research is there tends to be a lag why this is, recognized by the market. And two, you need to be realistic about what are the initiatives that you've actually put into place. Were they material, or were they more low-hanging fruit? So, again, it's the market's is going to invest based on what they see from an operational, competitive point of view, from a strategy point of view, and that is the offshoot of enhanced ESG practices. Again, it's not the ESG rating that's going to drive this.
Michael, just a quick supplementary on that, please, before we move on. Is the G in ESG under more scrutiny in Russia than other markets you operate in, or is that a shibboleth that we shouldn't pay too much attention to?
I think there is certainly an amount of scrutiny that is higher within Russia based on the framework of the marketplace. As everyone knows, there's a lot of government ownership, a lot of majority ownership by wealthy individuals, and that is not really indicative of best practices from a governance perspective. That typically leads to fewer independent directors. That shows up within the committees, within the board of directors, less scrutiny on related party transactions. So I think there's certainly more scrutiny on it. And that's kind of the anecdotal kind of thought on it. I actually kind of tested that premise though by looking at the database from MSCI and looked at the weighting that Russia has with regards to governance versus all the other countries. And in looking at that, we saw that Russia, as far as the weighting, rated on average 64th among 75 countries that receive weighting. So it's not as though Russia is the only country that has some of these kind of systematic issues with regards to majority ownership and the impact it has from a governance point of view. The interesting thing was when we looked at, again, the MSCI research, as far as where's the weighting directed from an E, S, and G angle, it's all pretty equal. Governance only slightly led, they were about 34%. The rest was around 32%. But when we compared that to other countries, environmental was the thing where really Russia stood out as far as a lot of emphasis from a weighting perspective. They ranked 6th of 75 companies, even though, again, it was only about 32%, which shows us, again, based on the economy in Russia, which has a lot of extractive industries, that's why it's so high. So again, governance certainly scrutinized, but again, I think it's more important is the industries that you're in, as far as the companies, and the materiality of the issues. So that's what we're seeing.
Thank you very much, Michael. Now, the question I really want to direct at Maxime and Irina. Perhaps Maxime first. How important is community engagement to your brand propositions, and what initiatives have you put in place to support in this area?
Well, I have to say here that we are a franchise. We are in the franchising business, so only a handful of our a few dozens of pizza shops in our network are company owned. The rest are launched by our franchisee partners. So every franchisee partner is highly engaged in their local communities, obviously, and being active locally is a great part of how they do business and how they connect with their customers. That's it.
And Irina, I mean, obviously Unilever puts a huge focus on this area globally. How does that play out in the Russian context?
So yeah, this is actually true in terms of the global agenda, because I think early, like 2 weeks after the pandemic struck, we announced our intention globally to invest 100 million euros to support communities and international organizations in tackling this agenda. And being an FMCG company, as I already mentioned, makes the task easier. So what we did in Russia, we outlined the communities in need, not only the consumers, but also the hospitals, for example, in schools, who required immediate supplies of products like home care and soap. And what we did, we outlined an outreach program which span across 5 cities where our factories are present. So that would be Moscow, where we have the central office, Tula region, St. Petersburg, Ekaterinburg, and Omsk. And in total, we managed to donate about 80 tons of our products, which are worth of roughly 400k euro market value. And that was actually one of the immediate actions that we had to do. Not just being present on the shelf, but trying to provide our products to the people in need as much as possible.
Thank you, Irina. And Rebecca, I know you do a lot of work with clients across Russia in this area as well.
Yes, and I think it's interesting. Russia's really interesting. We work with clients across the world, and while we've seen a marked increase in the last 2 to 3 years of clients from any part of the world looking to build a sustainability strategy. And I completely agree with Michael. You can't have an ESG rating that means anything unless you've got all the work behind it. Your ESG rating is a reflection of your sustainability profile and the commitments you're making and the programs you have in place to actually meet those goals. But what I think is unusual about Russia is, and what we certainly see, particularly in the heavy industrial side, is the kind of the mono-industry towns and how that drives a different sort of social license to operate. So we saw it with one of our clients, Rusal, who have a load of aluminium smelting operations in and around the Irkutsk region in Siberia. When the pandemic hit, the first thing they did was build a hospital for COVID patients. And it was a Rusal responsibility to build the hospital. It wasn't a state responsibility. It was something that they just knew they had to do. Then no one asked them to do it. They did it because there is this sort of, when everyone in a town or a city works within a certain industry or within a certain employer, then there is a much stronger social sort of license to operate that sort of is in place there. So yes, we've definitely seen a real increase in the kind of the tangible outputs of what Russian corporates are doing in terms of community engagement over the last 10 months.
Yeah, you saw big business in Russia certainly seems to have had more of a role than we would have seen here in the UK and other Western markets. And David, I can ask you a question sort of related to this. How much does sustainability messaging play into your overall brand marketing? I mean, are you actively trying to build Raketa as a sustainable brand or a luxury brand that just happens to be responsible?
Well, sustainability is not the main message that we're trying to get across. Our main message is promoting, values like the cosmos and other Russian, achievements.
Yeah.
But sustainability definitely is one of the messages, which is important for us and especially important for our customers. Our sellers in shops, they use the argument that goes along the way to say that these watches don't have any batteries or electronics. So basically, you'll never have to throw them away. They can run indefinitely as long as you take care of them. Unlike many Swiss brands, there's a kind of tradition in Swiss brands is that the more expensive the watch is, the bigger the box is. And a lot of people criticize that. We had big boxes at the beginning because we tried to copy the Swiss, and now we try to do things a bit differently. We have very small boxes, and people appreciate this. And these are cardboard boxes, which obviously are recyclable. So it's not the main message, but it is an important message. And our clients in Russia do understand that, especially the first argument that says that these watches are totally ecological because they can run forever, indefinitely, and you will never have to throw them away.
It's interesting, and David, just a supplementary, looking at it from another perspective, when you're looking for investors to come into the business, presumably they're looking at how ecologically responsible your production facilities are very closely.
Yes, so we are raising equity at the moment, and we are talking to one particular foreign investor. It's a professional investor, and we were very surprised how much he paid attention to basically he wanted to know exactly how we disposed of our hazardous waste. And we do have hazardous waste, which is chemical products, oil, mercury lamps. And he not only wanted to know the names of the companies, he also wanted to see the contracts. He wanted to make sure there was an official contract, there was no cash involved. And he also wanted to, he was surprised that some of these companies didn't have licenses. So in Russia, you can dispose of certain hazardous waste to companies that don't necessarily need a license. And this investor was quite surprised. And I do know that he asked his lawyers to double check this information. So they did some legal research and they confirmed this. So we were very surprised how deep they went into trying to understand how much we conformed with all the rules in terms of waste disposal.
Very good. And David, can I recommend very strongly that you use Rebecca Gudger to help you in that dialogue in future? Arena, can I ask you a question, please? Are you seeing any regional variations in the sustainability agenda, particularly between Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the regions, where I'm told it is often local authorities that take more of an effective lead than federal bodies?
Yeah, I would say there are two angles where we can actually approach this. So coming back to your first question and not seeing any differences and how people reacted to the sustainability agenda, I would like to recall a purely, sustainability related project that we're running both in Moscow and in some of the regions. This is the reverse vending machines, which we have installed with our retail partners to collect plastic bottles. And obviously, this is something where the actual presence of consumers and their ability to visit those stores is directly affected. What we have seen is that when in April, for example, there was a huge lockdown across Russia for quite a while, we have seen obviously a significant decrease in how many bottles were submitted to these reverse vending machines. What we have not seen is that since we have those machines installed in 5 different regions, the dynamics of how actively people try to use these machines was basically the same. We actually have 2 of them installed in Krasnodar and Magnit, which was mentioned by Rebecca previously. So probably it has to do a bit with the image of Magnit being a rising sustainable retailer. We have not seen any difference in activity between consumers who wanted to get rid of their plastic bottles in Moscow versus consumers who wanted to do this in Krasnodar, which actually is quite inspiring for us. And it actually inspired us to extend the regional chain of reverse vending machines next year. So that's going to be a huge piece of use we're going to announce very soon. What we have seen is that indeed the regional authorities have reacted quite differently. In some cases, they have reacted even more actively than the federal authorities, even in terms of how they treated the businesses and how they included them in the list of so-called systemic enterprises. So in some regions we had to wait for a long time for this to happen, and it obviously affected the way how we could support our employees in getting the necessary permits for their work, in how they could even now get some of the vaccines right now or get tested from COVID. So yeah, and this is, when we discuss this with our management, we have actually seen some interesting comparison with how it works in the US, for example, where the regional agenda is like super strong and each of the states is like very self-servant, I would say. And this is something that in our experience, Russia has seen. And in some regions, it was actually easier for us to do community outreach, specifically in St. Petersburg and in Moscow, obviously. We had to tackle some of the bureaucratic issues when dealing with other city regional authorities. I don't know, either because they weren't really feeling the need for the companies to help them or to some other reasons. But yeah, we have seen slight differences. We talk about that.
Very interesting. Now, a question for you all. I think moving away from the pandemic, it's related to the pandemic, but as we all know, real living standards in Russia are now under pressure. Do you think that Russia consumers going forward, and let's take a longer term view on this, if the economic situation remains challenging, are they going to regard, for instance, high quality food provenance or ecological friendly packaging as more of a luxury that they can forego in the short term for lower prices, and that catching up with Western standards is being put back or put on hold as people come under more pressure? Perhaps I can put that to Maxime first.
What I can say here is that, as I said before, we don't see customers pushing us to be more sustainable. We don't see the government pushing us to be more sustainable. What we are doing, we decided at some point that we want to lead here, and it coincided that just this year we publicly committed to double down on sustainability as a group. And right now we are actually assessing everything that we are doing in terms of our packaging, our supply chain, in terms of our own practices in the office, and we have like around 300 people just working for the managing company. There were already some like interesting revelations when we separated our trash, like plastic and paper and the rest, and our business office was collecting it. But when we started to like investigate what happens next with this trash, and we realized that most of the trash that goes, for example, in plastic, actually isn't thrown away basically, because it can be recycled, and the current infrastructure can't process it. So we are rethinking our own strategy in terms of like our small office waste, and we are rethinking our big strategy for like packaging. We are looking for the most innovative, cutting-edge solutions from all over the world, what we can introduce, and we are doing it because we feel that it's the right time for us. We used to be a very small company that was like fighting for survival every day. Right now, we have some resources, and we can do it. And if we can do it, we are going to do it. But in terms of like the demand, I'd like to like say it again. We don't see that like pushing for it. That's how we see it.
Thank you, and that's very interesting insight into the Russian dynamic. Irina, Unilever is obviously a huge global business. Do you see very different dynamics between paying up to stop climate change and higher prices in different countries? Are they very different experiences, or is that completely the wrong way to look at it in any event?
If we don't talk about pandemic, right, in general, so I would say that the climate agenda is quite new for us. We have been doing a lot of stuff around plastic, like I mentioned previously. It's been like super high on everything that Unilever does. Climate agenda is gaining more ground externally, and this is actually one of our top priorities for the upcoming 5 years. What we have not seen is actually, first of all, the understanding of consumers of how this should be dealt with. So a huge responsibility here lies with us and our partners to try and educate consumers maybe on where their responsibility lies, and how we tackle this agenda. And second of all, if we talk about the government, so we've been trying to drive this one on some of our platforms where we cooperate with the ministries, and the only probably small step that we have seen is the recent decree of the president, you know, with the famous number 666, which actually pushes for more ambitious goals in terms of carbon emissions. And this is something where I believe we can play a larger role. We have a huge agenda related to sustainable logistics, and we try to approach it specifically this year, despite all of this pandemic issues that we're facing. And we see that probably Russia is going to be one of the last countries in the Unilever list to tackle this one, because we don't really have immediate solutions for that for our business. So it's going to be a huge challenge for us to make happen.
That's very interesting. And Rebecca, I know you're doing a huge amount of work, for instance, in Africa, where incomes are obviously very low compared to Russia and developed markets in the West, but a huge focus on this area nevertheless.
I think it's global, and I think where you have a consumer base that is either doesn't have the social, financial inclusion that perhaps we would expect, then there really is a focus. So I don't think that kind of social piece is, and the part the consumer plays is unique to Russia at all.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Michael, perhaps if I can ask you from an investment perspective, Russian companies' adoption of ESG values, what stage are we at now? How would you characterize where Russia is in terms of adopting these metrics and embedding them in their operations and their investment propositions?
I think we've seen significant gains over the last 5 to 10 years, without a doubt. You know, I've been with BNY Mellon for 10 years in an ESG capacity, and you know, I work globally also, and particularly from a governance perspective, Russia is by far the clientele that I engage with that is looking to make the most amount of gains there. So I think you've come a long way, but as I kind of pointed out before with some of the rating statistics, which I have, you know, I think it's demonstrated that there's still a way to go. Again, looking at those 75 companies or countries that MSCI has ratings on, and which is not to insist that ratings are the end all be all for everything. But of the 75, Russia currently is ranked 64th of those. So there's still a ways to go. We've seen a lot of gains. You know, I think the important thing to realize is that you know, there's certainly a perception from a country characteristics, but investors look at companies on an individual basis. And if you're outperforming your peers, both globally and locally, that will be reflected in the valuations and the demand that you have for the stock.
Thank you, Michael. Can I remind everybody, please send in your questions through the chat device, and I will try to put them to the panel. One's come in for you, Maxime. It's from Olga Petrina. Will it be possible to use copters for delivering your food in Russia or in the UK? And is it something you're looking at?
Olga, thank you for the question. I think I know where it's coming from, because in as far back as 2014, we launched the world's first ever real commercial pizza delivery by drone. But it was quite a success and made the waves all over the world. But we had to shut this operation down because there weren't basically any regulations in place back then. And to be honest, I don't see it's happening in the near future, especially in the city landscape, because drones still they have to be like they are very heavy if they have to be to carry a heavy weight like for example a pizza or a few boxes with pizza, and it can be pretty dangerous for if the drone basically falls. And I think there is some potential in drone delivery in rural areas, like I don't know, in New Zealand, where there are like all these fields, and it's much easier to cross this field and reach some distant area with the drone than going on the road. And but yeah, since we are talking about sustainability, I don't think that this is the area you would like to be focused if you want to like make a difference in sustainability. I think the packaging and using the most obvious like ways of transportation, like e-bikes, scooters, it's a better way to tackle this.
Thank you, Maxime. And David, coming back to packaging and your focus on small packaging that's more sustainable, when you export, does that become an issue and you need to be closer to the Swiss model? Or do you find international purchasers are in line with your thinking on this?
No, everyone appreciates to receive a small package. Well, first of all, when you go to a shop, and imagine you're a tourist, you buy a big box, it's much more difficult to transport back home, right? So everyone appreciates the small box, and everyone is very aware that a small box is much better than a big box in terms of sustainability. And we communicate on this topic, and this is something people like and understand, and across all over the world, as well as in Russia, as well as outside Russia.
Thank you. And Michael, again, from your perspective, which companies in the Russian market do you think have succeeded best in communicating their ESG agenda and embedding it in their business models? Who are the poster boys and girls in Russia, as far as you can see?
Are you asking from a sector point of view, or are you asking from a company point of view?
Well, I think sector would be interesting. You may feel it's too sensitive to pick out companies, but I'll leave it to you.
Well, you know, as I mentioned before, you know, and this is certainly, there's no denying that, you know, the Russia is very much an extractive industry that's what leads the economy there. So there's certainly some difficulties from that point of view, from an ESG and sustainability point of view. So that kind of clouds the country overall. So from that perspective, we look at those that are outside of that industry, certainly those in the service industry or the grocery industry, where again, sustainability measures are easier to communicate and not tied to the environmental taint, so to speak, that we see in those other industries. So that's generally where we see the communication is best.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We worked with Magnet on the launch of their sustainability strategy recently, and it really is a world-class program. Benchmarks very, very credibly against big global leaders. And Rebecca, your work you're doing in Siberia, you're doing a lot of work in a certain very ecologically sensitive lake. How would you characterize, I mean, in terms of working with the authorities, working with the leaders of the businesses you're supporting, how would you benchmark that experience against what you've been doing elsewhere in the world, particularly in the fishing industry, for instance?
Thank you. I think Russia, and yes, Andrew's right, we do a lot of work around Lake Baikal, which is the world's oldest, largest lake and contains a fifth of the world's natural fresh water. And it is a UNESCO heritage site as well, and has a lot of endemic species. And so we're doing quite a lot of work on programs with our clients, on programs around protecting the quality of the lake, not least because it actually is used to generate hydropower, which goes to generate the electricity that powers the whole of Siberia. So there is a very practical usage for this. So the lake has to be kept in tip-top condition. I would say that there is, because of the sort of federal nature of the government around Lake Baikal, it has been perhaps problems that would have been addressed sooner in other parts of the world are now being addressed. But again, we're seeing the corporates lead on that, and it being a push on the federal government to actually put the regulation in place that will stop the heavy metals leaking out of water treatment plants into Lake Baikal, rather than, as we see in some other countries where we work, the government imposing regulation upon the corporates. So it is a kind of reverse there. But the reason I think a lot about Siberia, I've spent a lot of time thinking about Siberia and visiting Siberia. I think we've seen a real upturn in the number of Russian companies who are now very rapidly coming towards the process of building a sustainability strategy and doing it in a much more serious way than we see some other companies do it. And I think things like the problem at Norilsk Nickel have really kind of opened everyone's eyes up to perhaps what the potential is. And Norilsk Nickel too, that the incident that happened there to a greater or lesser extent was a result of global warming. So, you know, when the permafrost goes, the whole kind of land that things are built on and resting on actually becomes less stable, then accidents will happen. So I think Russia and Siberia particularly, over the course of 2 months last year, they saw catastrophic fires, droughts and floods that killed people. So they really are at the sharp end of climate change. So I think there is quite a lot of waking up to the fact that they need to do it. I've actually got some figures. According to the IPCC, Russia's climate increase is set somewhere between 4 and 12 degrees. But on average, they agree about 4.5. It depends who you ask. Now, that is significantly higher than anywhere else in the world. So the IPCC recognises that Russia really is going to suffer. And also, even if you just look at history, since 1960, Russia has heated up. The rate of increase in temperature in Russia has been 2.5 times the global average. And in the permafrost region, so Siberia and eastern northern Siberia, it's been 3 to 4 times faster than anywhere else in the world. So global warming, the climate crisis is having a demonstrable impact on Russia and on Russian business. So I think that is driving quite a lot of this.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Rebecca. Staggering statistics, very interesting. Now, I'm going to ask one final question, the same question to all of the panelists, please, because we're coming to the end of the session. And the question is, can you identify one ESG trend that you think we will see more of in Russia in 2021? Now, Irina, I know Unilever must be modeling this in every way imaginable. What's the one trend we'll see more of in Russia next year that you would pick out?
I think if we talk about not only next year but probably the next 10 years, we have seen that the ecological environmental agenda has been like super high, and I've mentioned that climate change is going to be, you know, the talk of the day in the upcoming years. But in my opinion, I would say that the social aspects are gaining ground as well, and I would say that tackling inequality specifically in Russia, specifically after this particular year, would be a huge challenge for everyone. So tackling financial inequality, maybe something dealing with how people view the society, the stereotypes. So anything dealing with, you know, inclusivity versus inequality has to be in the spotlight, and will be in the spotlight for sure.
Very interesting. And Maxime, from your perspective at Dodo, is there a trend you think we'll see more of next year in Russia that you think is worth highlighting?
Well, to be honest, I think that all the trends that we are seeing across the globe will come to Russia sooner or later. It's hard to predict which one will land faster, like the next year. But what I can say is that I would definitely hope to see like more effort on the government side, because lots of things, at least where our industry is involved, depends a lot on the infrastructure. For example, for recyclable garbage and things like this. For things like I'm based in Berlin and in Germany, and it goes without saying that every building here has like lots of different trash bins for plastic, for bio garbage, then and others. And unless you have the same infrastructure in Russia, and this infrastructure has to be built by the government, you can do a lot about it, because you can make your pizza boxes the most recyclable ever pizza box on this planet. But if there is no infrastructure to collect them and to recycle them, it will be all in vain. And I see that in Moscow there are like first innovations, and this infrastructure is being built, and I believe that it will be coming, and I hope it will be coming to other cities across the country.
Very interesting. And David, can I put the same question to you? But before I do, a question's coming specifically for you, which would also be interesting to have your answer on. It's what difficulties do you meet when promoting Russian brands in Europe? Perhaps we'll just deal with that, and then a trend that you would like to highlight over the coming years.
Well, a very short answer to this question is actually it's much easier to promote Raketa watches outside Russia than in Russia. Yeah. People very much like the fact that we're a niche brand that stands out from the crowd, which carries very strong values linked to Russian achievements in art, avant-garde art, Cosmos submariners, and also that our watches are manufactured in-house. People understand that and appreciate that very much. So actually, we think that promoting our Russian watches and brands outside Russia is much easier than doing the same job in Russia.
Interesting.
In terms of, thank you very much for the question. And in terms of, I agree both with Irina and with Maxime, with Irina, because I also think the ecological topic is a very hot topic at the moment in Russia. And I certainly think that Russians are very much becoming aware of it. And I also agree with Maxime when he says that most of the trends worldwide eventually reach Russia at some point or another. I've lived in Russia for the past 20 years, and I've really seen it. Eventually, everything comes to Russia at some point.
And the same question to you, Rebecca.
I'm going to put I think all the trends we're seeing at the moment will continue and grow, but I'm going to put my money on something slightly different, and that is biodiversity and nature-based solutions. And I think the scale and kind of the natural resources that Russia has at the moment will mean that becomes increasingly important. And when it's kind of linked to the climate thing, when you think that a fifth of the world's forest is in Russia, and the forest is absolutely critical to, as a carbon sink, to sequestering some of the greenhouse gases we're putting out. It's a vital part of addressing the climate crisis. So I think we will see an increased focus on protecting biodiversity and nature-based solutions that will drive that.
Yeah, very interesting. It's what David said in the previous session, that Russia gets this right, the whole world really does benefit.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Michael, let's finish with a good old investment perspective. What's going to be the trend in ESG when people look at Russia next year and the year after?
You're certainly throwing me a curveball there at the end. So I'll come back to that in a second. As far as the trends I think that are most important for Russia, again, I point to how energy and the extractive energy is such an important part of it. We're seeing enhanced and more stringent regulations, particularly in Europe, with regards to energy and the use of energy and what's acceptable, particularly from a carbon perspective. So I think looking at Russia is the ability to raise their game with regards to being able to fulfill that need, that demand, and those requirements from a Russian point of view. So coming back to the investment perspective, I think investors are going to be looking quite closely at the ability for Russian companies particularly Russian energy companies, to be able to provide the product in the way that the neighboring countries will deem to be acceptable, to do that going forward. I think that Russia is maybe a little behind the curve with regards to renewables. They have such an expansive supply of the traditional energy resources. So I think that'll be looked at closely in the near and longer term.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. That brings us to a close, the panel bit of the forum. I know there's a fascinating virtual tour of the Pushkin Museum about to happen. But I want to say thank you for all the panelists for your time. I hope all of the panelists, except David, because he would have done it already, is going to buy a loved one a Raketa watch for Christmas. The coolest brand you can find. And thank you, everybody. Have a very happy Christmas, and let's hope we all have a prosperous and healthy new year. Alf.
Andrew, many thanks for a really interesting panel discussion. I'm just sorry we didn't see you. Although I suppose to a certain extent it is in the Christmas spirit, and you were very much the ghost of Christmas past as you shimmied, shimmied in and out of a picture. Anyways, I'd also like to add my thanks to the panelists. Fantastic insight there, Michael, Rebecca, Irina, Maxim, and David. And as I said to Dimitri, obviously ESG is the topic of the moment, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of time in 2021 to carry on the fascinating